Das ist der HSG Student Podcast. Mein Name ist Olli und zusammen gehen wir auf die Suche nach spannenden Geschichten und Persönlichkeiten von der HSG. Elon Musk's SpaceX had to postpone the start of their spaceship Starship a couple days ago. While the attempt of Elon Musk's company has failed, we are going to talk today still about how to successfully building moonshot startups, not spaceships. So in this context, I'm really happy to welcome William and Chantal to today's session for this episode. And yeah, I thought about why not. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell me what is your connection to building moonshots, and maybe to add a bit of flavor, tell us something also about not many people know about you, but you're feeling comfortable to share with.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Really excited to be here. My name is Chantal. I did my bachelor's here in business administration, just finished this summer, and now starting my own organization. It's a social enterprise, and I'm here because I got connected to William in 2020. And there I took the strategic foresight class. It was really a driver for me to dive into entrepreneurship and just trying out something new. And I'm really excited to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you for your introduction. What about you, Bill?
Yeah, so I am a lecturer here at St. Gallen, have been teaching here originally in 2003, 2004. I taught high-tech entrepreneurship. I'm back teaching a strategic foresight course, which we teach in the fall. We're actually doing a capstone right now with a group of wonderful students. It's part of what I do to go around the world and teach. So I'm on the faculty of more schools than I should count, but most of it came out of the work that I've been doing at Stanford for 20 years. So I dropped out of college a long time ago and ended up immediately at Apple Computer and got to do some amazing things at an amazing time with amazing people. And was from manufacturing, software, hardware, product. And over time, got a chance to go do really amazing cutting edge research for the US government, got to work for advanced research groups like Daimler-Benz when they had a Silicon Valley office, and eventually started my own company when I was about 27, which did some amazing stuff during the dot-com before, of course, everything crashed. And what that led to was I went back to the universities and said, I'm really interested in connecting amazing young talent with the big vision, because all too often we don't teach the younger people, hey, you should have the vision now, and let me show you how to get the team, the financing, the mindset, the model, and get everyone behind it. So I went back to the university to teach that. A class is called Strategic Foresight here at St. Gallen. Back in California, it's the same thing at Stanford and other schools. And then from that, my colleague, Dr. Tamara Carlton, she and I just produced our newest book, which is Building Moonshots. And what we did was we took all of our insights from the teaching, but more importantly, from Dr. Carlton's work with companies like Airbus, with governments, with NGOs. She spent about 15 years working with the largest organizations in the world, helping them see really far, and further than just doing vision, how do you actually make it real? So we've got 50 plus ways in the book to make it real. And Chantal knows a lot of these ways already from the work we did here. But then I'm actually really interested in hearing what you brought back when you went to Harvard and what you've done to set up the organization.
Yeah, for sure. I think the main thing you just mentioned is having a big vision. And I think that really helped me to cultivate that mindset, but also have the courage to really lean into it and actually start building something. And yeah, I think it's all about intentionally creating your desired future. And for me, so basically our startup, Team Spirit International, is all about enhancing refugee self-reliance. So really trying to create a new future which is more inclusive, innovative, and resilient. And I think for that, it was really helpful to have that strategic foresight mindset, because it helped you to try to imagine the impossible and then kind of backtrack to the present, and then trying to find ways how to actually create a business that will lead into this direction.
So I'm laughing only because I've got if you go to buildingmoonshots.com, you can pre-order the book. It's out on May 9th. But right now you can download a free poster that we put together primarily because I couldn't remember all of our ways at a moment's notice or which number they were. And I felt really dumb. But actually I've got that right now. And that was way number 2, start from the almost impossible. Well, no, but it's really funny that you've now got that language and you're part of now this bigger group, which is people look at you and go, that's impossible. And you go, well, I mean, it would be, but I have a way to get there. And I know where to, and I'm going through the ways. I know where to make my bets. I know how to find the financing. I know how to galvanize my team. These are all the kind of things we have in the book. Very discrete lessons, which says, look, no matter where you are in your cycle, no matter whether you're a startup or a large company, an NGO, no matter whether you're in Africa or you're in wonderful Switzerland, there's something here you can take away from it. So you kind of could to pick this up, and I think they might be able to experience a little bit of what you've done over your life. But how did you come up with this? I'm still amazed by that.
So, I mean, I was invested in the refugee space for a longer time, even when I did a class with you, because I just feel like there are not enough opportunities for refugees to leverage your skill set and really have a flourishing life, because most of the time you just receive bare necessities like food and shelter, but don't really have any means to move beyond that. So I was invested for, I think, over 2 years or even 3 years now to finding a solution to that problem. And we did one idea we had in class was review, but then I iterated to more a development economic approach. So I did an exchange year at Harvard, and there was really my opportunity to go in and really develop this business. So it all started out with, what do refugees currently have? And they don't have a lot. So we tried to find a conducive environment where people actually want refugees to flourish and give them a lot of opportunities. So that's in Uganda. And then from there, we basically tried to see, okay, how could a future look like where there are fluid structures, where people can all use their different skill sets no matter where they are? So we tried to find self-reliance approaches that actually help people to further build and leverage your own skill set. And then, created kind of programs around that. So one side educational, one side like really creating ecosystems and where people can share their knowledge. And also create these partnerships amongst the community and with outside people that we can all together move into a different direction.
So Uganda was your first launch. You have a second one going on?
No, we're currently still based in Uganda and we'll be there.
So Africa is really your focus right now?
Yes, okay. Africa is a focus because it's the whole approach is also based on Alexander Betts, Oxford professor's approach, where you basically use the cultural proximity of refugees to their countries. Like I think Uganda has the fourth biggest refugee population in the world.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and 1.5 million, and they come from over 30 countries. So instead of fleeing somewhere to Europe where it's super different, they can come to much closer areas, and they're culturally closer. But also it helps to drive economic growth there, and also bring back investments from the West, because here the environment is less conducive to refugees, so they like to spend somewhere else, and then they can build their futures.
There was a big piece in the Financial Times yesterday talking about how migrants and refugees, while countries are trying to push them away, Europe, North America's, yet at the same time, they desperately need them. And of course, one of the arguments is they bring youth. But the other argument they brought was they take risks. And that's the kind of thing you need right now. So we need risk taking, whether it's starting something small, whether it's helping start a community group, or whether it's, if you look at Silicon Valley, the number of immigrants who run the companies is astounding. Most of the top companies right now are run by people who were not born in California, much less the US, which I think speaks to it as well, because actually back to the book, only because I'm going to keep tying back to this. We've actually got a whole bunch of pieces. One of the whole sections was how to make big bets. And that's one of the things that actually becomes really interesting for you, even going to the US. We were talking before the podcast, are you going to go back to the US? Because, whatever happened to you at Harvard, did it change you forever because you're back here? And are you just pining to leave beautiful Switzerland? And the answer was, well, no, but now you're going to become bicultural and you become bi-country. And that's really interesting to me because I've been doing the same thing. Dr. Carlton's been doing the same thing as well. We've spent the last 30 years of our lives flying around and dropping into little places to see what's going on there and what amazing things can we bring back in. And I'll tell you, the interesting part is there's moonshots everywhere. That's what's so interesting to me.
And, how do you identify moonshots? Because I think if you go anywhere, everywhere, your time is somehow limited, right? So
not with the internet. I might be old here. You can't see my gray on the podcast, but I've grown up with the internet. So to me, everything is just a phone call away. Now it's an email. You can easily collaborate with people. I've been doing collaboration since I got to Apple back in, 1991, 92. I had a team that was between Cupertino, where I was, and Singapore. And we were trading things back and forth. It was harder, but we were on the phone. So it's easy for me to pop around. And what's so interesting is this belief system. If you show a young person that you can do big things, if you say to them, I'll believe you, and let me show you how to bring other people on, whether it's employees, whether it's people who are going to become promoters for you, whether it's someone who maybe you're going to look for investment, it turns out once you've given people the freedom, they're unlocked. They become completely powerful. And then it's to your point, it's kind of like, let's go through the rest of the list. How do you create a vision? How do you then galvanize your team? How do you put this into action by creating stepping stones that I can do something with? Some of it you learn in entrepreneurship courses. Some of it, though, you just have to try on your own. The typical story, you're not going to know it until you try it.
Mm-hmm. And maybe, Chantal, this is a great opportunity for you. I guess you're having some challenges for sure while building your startup in Uganda, and maybe Bill can not help you but advise you or based on his book maybe also showcase how the book is best used in practice.
I'm intrigued how you're able to get local talent working. How are you inspiring them to think bigger?
Honestly, I was surprised so positively how engaged people were. You didn't need to do anything. Basically, just show up and show your true intentions and show that there is a bigger vision, and everyone was just like, yes, let's go. So I think there was not really a problem to get the talent. It's more about, I think what we face, like challenges more financially and also program-wise. So we did a 1-week educational boot camp where we taught agroecological and business principles to refugees, and like kind of co-created farmer collectives where they later could continue their learnings and actually have then like another livelihood opportunity, because we also provided seeds and tools for them. So the approach worked super well because many refugees are farmers there. As I said, they were super excited, and so like they drove a lot of the program as well with their engagement. And so we could continue like this, but of course I want to find the right angle to really scale this and make sure we can have a big impact. So I think one of the considerations or challenges is one, how to best continue. So one way is to have several second set of pilot programs, go and replicate in a different context, go deeper into agricultural supply chains and see how we can best fit there and improve the programs. And other one is leaning in also women empowerment, because that's a huge issue they face a lot of additional challenges, refugee women. So that's one. And then, of course, biggest challenge, getting money, because right now we had crowdfunding. So that worked well. But now we need sustainable financials. And since we're still not super geared to the programs we have or super tied down, it's still, trying to navigate that is what I'm working on.
So that's easy. No, so funny. I was listening to you mention seeding new fields, and I was like, oh my God, we that's one of our lessons is you need to seed new fields, which was actually what you were saying, because you were saying, well, we created the boot camp, and the boot camp then put the people together to then co-create this collective, and the collective should then live on. And that's actually one of the insights that's really important when you're doing moonshot type work, or even thinking that way, is this isn't a sprint. It's not an MVP. It's not the first funding environment. It's going to take a while. So it's it could be a startup, but it's the startup that's going to create flying cars on the moon. It's not just going to create something easy, but it's going to take a while. And you mentioned the spaceship at the beginning and the work that Tesla's been doing. There was an interesting comment this morning of, if you'd wanted to invest in Tesla when it was a small company, you need to go back to 2003. That company was started 20 years ago by a bunch of young people. And you don't realize it. And at the time, I remember in the Valley, if you'd said, oh, you're going to build an electric car, the number of people would say, no, it's impossible. And they would be very credible. They would say, no, it's impossible. You'll never find money. You're never going to build the stepping stones. You're never going to be able to put together the team. And by the way, science doesn't allow it. And I think, the breakthroughs that have come along have disproven a lot of that. But it's interesting when I was listening to you talk about the funding part, because that's, again, it's not going to lead to it directly, but the CEO of Logitech, and you guys recognize Logitech, it's a Swiss company with Silicon Valley arm, and the CEO is I think Bracken Darrell, I think is his name. He had a really good story a few months ago on another wonderful podcast from Monocle. He was talking about what they do at Logitech. And he said, look, we have 3 models we work from: seeds, plants, and trees. Trees are the things that flower. They give us the fruit. They're the moneymaker. You recognize our model, right? Horizon 1. The plants are things that, you're bringing up. You've got them in a hothouse. You're trying to make them work. The seeds are where you start. And his point was they had about, he said, I think 15 to 25 seeds at any given time that they're just trying to cultivate. And that's, interestingly enough, for you, you get that already. You know this is going to be a long journey. It's going to take a while to get there. I'm really interested in how are you communicating this to other people? I mean, crowdsourcing is one pathway out. How are you communicating the kind of opportunity and potential? How are you communicating your vision to potential funders?
I think one of the things we're doing that is with a diverse team. So we have 2 members currently that are from the African Leadership University.
Oh, hey, ALU. And guess who I'm talking to in about an hour? Fred was on our, so we're friends with some people who've done some really amazing stuff in Africa. One guy's Fred Swaniker. You can actually find him on his TED Talk or one of his many talks online, the Skoll Foundation. He's actually one of our moonshot leaders that we love. He set out a few years ago to basically revolutionize learning and talent development across Africa. And when we first met him back in, I think, 2010 in Johannesburg, and he's from originally Ghana, I think, but we met him and he said, oh, I'm going to, generate, I think, 1 million, students a year. And you kind of looked at it and went, 1 million? Like that's impossible. Like I know universities, they graduate a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 people a year. What are you doing? Fred's been doing this for a while, but we actually had him on a fireside chat last week as one of our kickoff events for Building Moonshots. And we were there with his group called The Room, which is a very big talent network. And actually we're doing a boot camp with them effectively today, tomorrow, next week kind of thing. But yeah, I'm on that in a few hours. But yeah, so it's interesting. That was one of the things that when it came down to when we heard Chantal's vision and that you were going after Africa, my first comment was, I know a bunch of people who dig vision. I know a bunch of people who they know what a visionary is. So they don't flinch when you say I'm doing something absolutely impossible. They go, okay, how big? So you've got ALU people.
Yeah, exactly. And also, still Harvard connections. So there, we did 2 incubators and are still part of one, the Harvard Innovation Labs. So I think that really helps to just step out and meet new experts, meet new people. And I think that always leads you to, it's more informal ways to get money. Of course, we're applying to grants now and all of these things, but I think organically building that network with people that align with your values and your vision, I think has really helped.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the most important challenge at the moment is, getting more money. So specifically in the Moonshot book, which way would you advise?
I'm actually looking at, so we've got a section called Financing for Alpha, and Alpha, of course, means, large upside. And, it's you've already been saying these things. One is, seed the new fields. Another one is, build the future ecosystems, invest in them. It turns out these lessons are both for small teams who sometimes don't realize that, it's not just the near-term win. You've actually got to have friends. You have to have people that promote you and support you. And by the way, large companies fail at this in the same way. The one that keeps coming back to me, though, that's interesting is publishing your moonshot metrics. So this has been something that we've actually found, you go in and saying, I want to change the future of education in Africa, and everyone goes, that's nice. But if you say, okay, but I want to educate 1 million people this year, they go, wow, 1 million's a number. And I can begin to do the math in my head and go, wow, so I have spent most of my life at universities like a Stanford or a Senegal. And you go, well, Stanford, they graduate 2,000 undergrads a year. You go, 1 million is a much bigger number than 2,000. That's not 10x. That's not, oh my God. How are you going to do that? And how are you going to make money? And how are you going to, and we found that if you put real numbers behind things, it makes people wake up. It makes people pay attention a lot more.
But this is maybe a critical question, but isn't that just, goal setting and somehow obvious? Is your empirical observation different?
No, so the thing that's interesting is a lot of people don't set goals correctly. They don't, you say to them, oh, KPIs and OKRs, and everyone goes, and then they don't put anything out there that's actually measurable. And the first thing is what can be measured. And, you find that when you actually dig into whether it's the original Toyota way or whether it's in the updated Lean or whatever you want, people put real numbers on things, you hold them to it. And then they can say, we didn't hit this by a certain percentage, or we didn't hit it in a certain time, which lets you then begin to metric things a little differently. And we found that for the people who put hard numbers on things, back to your example earlier, spaceship, there's a number of times that Elon Musk has put numbers out there. And every time he gets called on it because he misses them every time.
But they're so immensely high that
but
even if he reaches 50%.
But what's curious is we can say how much he missed them by. Yeah. We can look at it and go, he only got 25%. And we might discredit that, but you kind of go, well, nobody got 25% of a big number that's amazing. And that gets back to the impossible metric, right? If you can set an impossible metric out there and say, I know how to achieve it, this begins from a funding perspective to bring more serious people around you. And again, it's the classic piece of, I don't think we have to talk to the Sangal students about that, but if you understand how finance works, you've got a superpower. Now it becomes a tool that you can use. Well, this is the same kind of thing. If you can put real numbers behind your moonshot vision, not just we want to change the world, but we're going to change the world with this group of people, this many, we're going to get this much money to do it, and here's how much we're going to make a commitment to it. I think that's a big issue. And Swanaker's a good example. We have him in the book. He's actually our example in the book because he set out a number of how many people he was going to educate in a certain amount of time frame. He went in a TED Talk and announced it. He went to the Skoll Foundation and announced it. And you kind of say, well, at the point he was talking at that level, people sat up. And they said, okay, if he's going to do that, then he's going to be making certain assumptions. Let me call him. Let me see kind of money he needs to do that.
Yeah. So Chantal, transferring that to your startup, do you already have like a preliminary impossibility vision that maybe also I'm not sure, do you have it, or is it something that you now could randomly come up with something?
I mean, I know in Uganda itself there are 1.5 million refugees, so
right.
Helping them would be, of course, one goal, but my overall vision is really to create a scalable model across agrarian economies in developing countries. So like the vision extends to millions, because I really want to find some kind of program where people can use their local knowledges, leverage their previous skill set, and then just like create platforms and ecosystems where people can have a good life and not only like survive and have the bare minimum, but it really extends to all people that are in agrarian economies and more in developing circumstances. So the bigger vision.
Well, no, I think the interesting way, so, you've got that target already. You say, look, if we just take Uganda, we've got 1.5 million refugees. Mm-hmm. Now, in that space, here's how many we've worked with today. In the next 5 years, we want this number. And you've already got that in your model, right? We know that. The trick is, what do you think the levers are that potential funders are going to listen to? Is it new jobs created by the refugees? Is it new parts of the economy added? I mean, where do you see them wanting to hear feedback? The people that you think they're going to give us money beyond the crowdfunding you've done?
I think there are different kind of funders. Of course, there's one, the social justice argument, which is really important to me, but I also realize that that's not always as important. I think for funders, it's really important to hear that you have a sustainable long-term vision.
What would social justice have as a metric?
Creating social impact, like more like good
account of what though? Is it the number of girls in education? Would it be the number of women who've started new business and are able to sustain the family? Are those the kind of numbers that they look for? Or yes. I don't know the space well enough.
No, exactly. It's like how well women are integrated into society, how they have access to the market, to opportunities, all kind of that. That's more like on a broader level, but just these kind of metrics are important to some funders. But I think for others, it's really to see what other benefit it has. Apart from that, of course, that's good for them, but also like how can the economy grow with that? Like how can they push the market forward? And also I think in terms of innovation, that's also one of my arguments, because if there are more people on the table, it's known that and more diverse people around the table, you can actually create much better solutions. So I think that's also one of the things they would want to hear, like diversity, inclusion. You can also argue for climate change or climate resilience, because there are going to be more displacements, much more. We already see it now with climate change or global geopolitics. So I think that's also one argument where you can, try to get funding.
We've been working with the Swedish government's innovation agency for the last few years, and it's called Vinnova. They're kind of an equivalent as an American to like advanced research from DARPA's plus say, university research, National Science Foundation, but they also go all the way down to funding impact stuff like yours. And I know that they were looking at a lot of interesting metrics around inclusion. And they were doing things like co-creation of new ecosystems. And they were doing, the typical run a boot camp, bring a bunch of people in and have them co-create something. And what was interesting is when we were talking with them last year, they were just beginning to move beyond butts in seats, the classic metric of, okay, we got a bunch of people, we had 30 people on this one and 50 people on this one. And they were then struggling with what did they as a government funder want to see. And curiously enough, they didn't have a good metric. They were very interested in what the community was going to do for them because they were going out, for example, the people who were interested in the female side would be like, okay, well, if that's what your interest is, what should we measure? Because clearly if you're doing women's inclusion, you're not necessarily saying, well, we're just going to measure new jobs created, which is a classic government one. Or we're not going to measure just GDP if you're saying, well, we're not actually focused on alpha and upside, we're actually focused on sustainability. That's a different issue. Are these people able to sustain their households? We're not just trying to grow. So it was interesting that even the government funder didn't have that, I'd say a year ago.
Yeah, and I think that's also one of the, or it was a challenge for developing the pilot, like trying to find right metrics, because this topic with refugees also touches a lot of topics and areas. So it's really hard to find the right metrics and set these goals earlier because we didn't know, how best will function. Of course, we tried to look at different initiatives before, but I think it's really important to measure your impact. And the more I get into social impact and all of these things, and also as an entrepreneur, I think it's the most important thing that we don't really get taught as much. M&Es, I think it's kind of, or I at least sit here, so yeah.
I also have the question, how do I have to imagine being an entrepreneur in Uganda while studying in Switzerland?
How did you pick that?
What does this mean?
Was it just because there were so many refugees, it was a target market?
Yeah,
because I'll be blunt, as someone who looks further ahead in time and says, okay, what's it going to look like over the next 5, 10, or 15 years? I've spent enough time in foresight. The refugee problem is number one on everyone's metric right now. And I mean, we're seeing it in all of Europe by way of Italy, and no one can figure that out. We're seeing it on the south coast of the US. No one knows what to do with it. So it becomes, interestingly enough, your platform has to scale, and a variety of others. It's not just going to be you over the next 20 years because the refugees are just going to double, triple, quadruple. They're going to 10x without us helping them. Exactly. So what do you do? But I think the other part about metric, though, and we hear it all the time, you measure what matters. And that's the question that's going to come back to you. What are you measuring that matters to your organization? That will eventually be your metric. When you get that, and it's not going to come right away, publish it. Be very loud about it. And be very bold with it and say, look, we're going to 100x it. That's what I find when I talk to people like Fred Swaniker is, I'll joke with them and I'll say, wow, that's like a 10x or 100x. And he'll very quickly correct me, like, no, it's 320%. You kind of go, yeah, okay. I was using that metaphorically, and he's not. He's using it as a real number. We're doing this many today. This is how many we're going to do in 5 years.
Yeah. But back again, I'm really interested in what it means to live and to work or do a business in Uganda from Switzerland, right?
I think for me, I was lucky enough because I had a good environment around me, but also always communicated what I was working on, what I was passionate about. And the different courses I took were deliberate choices, like how to develop businesses in developing countries, migration and human rights. It was all at Harvard. So it kind of put me in this trajectory. And then I got connected somehow to people in Uganda. And we worked very closely with a partner organization. They're also refugee-led, called Tamar Vijana. And they've really helped us building out the pilot program and everything because we don't know, they've worked with the community for 10 years. And they helped us actually develop all of this and create it because we don't know the community as much. I mean, I did a lot of research, months of research to understand the dynamics more, government side, legal side, everything. But it was really interesting. I think we were lucky that we found them. We could work remotely together. And through that intense research, interviews with refugees, even though I was in the States and they were in Uganda, and then coming this February to Uganda and actually just launching something. I think all this combination of good partnerships, good research, helped us to do that. And it was really exciting project.
And how come, this only happened when you were in Harvard, was St. Gallen not, let's put it provocative. Was St. Gallen not good enough, or were there not enough opportunities for your project that this happened, or is there a reason why it was only happening in Harvard?
I think let me put it in a good way. I think here there are more traditional pathways. I think they're pushing with initiatives like oikos, like student clubs or student impact, or classes like strategic foresight for people to really step outside of the box. But I found that at Harvard, it was for me easier to lean into more the social justice topics, like more liberal arts focused classes, and they also were pushing entrepreneurship. There was literally a class where you could take and you built a startup. It's exactly like, but they also had like incubator and everything. So yeah, I think also taking the class strategic foresight, you could really, now that I've been to the States, really notice that American dynamic, like go, build, fail. It's like, and I think that was very encouraging environment to do so. And to move more into social justice topic instead of more profitable, startups.
So let me be provocative. You come out of the Swiss gymnasium system, right? Could you have done it right straight out of that, done the same type of things, do you think? Did you need to go through the whole St. Gallen experience before you got to a Harvard experience? Or could you have done it right as you were coming, before you came? Could that have been the St. Gallen experience? Go big, start everything from scratch, like the classes aren't really classes, they're all workshopped. Could you have done that?
Interesting question. To be honest, I think I would have loved that.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I love these type of environments, and I think innovation is so interesting. And Switzerland is an innovation hub, but it's limited, I think, can be limited in their way of thinking, because we're more like people that want to have more safe bets, and like generally I would say. But still, like I took the class here at HSG, strategic foresight, so it's now it's like there.
Did I have the slide when you took it where we had the head of ETH's, what is it, the educational program, ETH RAT, which is, I guess, the authority behind all the top unis. And he gave a presentation, a quote at NZZ one day. And his quote translated as an American to, Swiss need to think bigger. And that was like, yeah, interesting. So I think, that's the question. Could you have done it straight through? It's just my thing. And I'm not in any way criticizing St. Gallen. This gets back to the moonshot mindset. Like we're trying to figure out how to get it even younger. And then, you have imagine these younger kids, they took their summer internships to their co-ops before they came to school, where they were getting to join a team like Chantal's and do something really interesting and try to think big and being promoted for doing that. So that by the time they get here and they get put in the situation where now we're going to teach you amazing tools, finance and how to communicate and now you know why you're using those tools.
But as a challenge to this, to what you're saying, sometimes isn't it that, you need experience as well, right? And young people usually don't have too much experience. So you don't think this, like, experience, you can't buy experience, right? So how would you respond to someone challenging you with...
Well, that's what I think. You had the seminal experience to ground you here at a university, and then you got to go to another university that just shook you up. And I guess the question would be, how much more shaking up can we do here? I was looking at the class list today, sitting here at Square, going, God, I take that class and I take this class, and then I was thinking, right, but if I was taking the classes, I'd have a way of tying them all together in my head, because I'm an old guy. And I was like, what if you're young and you're taking that class? Like, what if you're in your first or second year? I mean, is it anything more than just drops in the bucket? And I say that not to pick on the university here. That was my experience as an engineer in college. That was my experience when I was young, was like, you had all these classes to take, but you're not really sure why. And if you had passion, it wasn't meant for school. It was after school. It was running a podcast, for example. It was starting a project on the side that then became a passion, that then became your real business. I mean, again, I do remember the inkling of your idea when you were in the class here and going, okay, yeah, I mean, that's a great idea. And then you just kept going and going and going. So I'm intrigued by, could you give people the experience earlier to go build moonshots? Give them the mindset, give them the tool set, give them the projects, but do it when they're in gymnasium. Do it when they're younger even. Let them do big things. Now, of course, are they going to accomplish as much? Maybe.
So when you look back on the last 10, 20, 30 years you've been promoting this, what was your maybe most favorite moonshot? You mentioned Fred, he's called, right?
Fred Swaniker. Yeah. Fred's contemporary. I mean, Fred, I only met Fred 10 years ago when we were in Johannesburg and Tamara and I were doing a program down in South Africa. We'd been invited by the government and some nonprofit foundations that were trying to build a new ability in South Africa as the tip of the spear for Africa. Fred found us because we were all talking, scaling education, scaling learning into doing big things. And Fred was already doing it. He'd already started a high school called African Leadership Academy. So we were already in line with him. But, that was 10 years ago. If you go back, 15, 20, 25, I'm old enough to tell you when we were all sitting around talking about what if this computer we had on the desktop, this thing with this Macintosh, this big thing, what if you could have it and hold it in your hand? I mean, that would just be mind-blowing. And I'm lucky enough, I come from the generation that wrote and built most of those devices. So I remember the friends who went and built what eventually becomes iOS, or the friends that went and built what eventually becomes Android. We were all just a bunch of young, dumb kids sitting around. And dumb in the sense that we couldn't tell you what was going to come, but we could see it. And by the way, each of us had a capability. I mean, some of the guys I'm talking about, I met them at places like Apple Computer because they were building the Macintosh OS that they then went and made smaller and different and smaller. And then 20 years later, it becomes this. So I think that's part of the piece, is to know it's a journey and to know that even if you start young, again, it's not like an MVP. It's not like a quick IPO. You might work on this 2 or 3 times before it comes to fruition. There's a company called Magpie right now. That's an interesting one if people want to Google it. And it's doing aviation. It's doing electric planes, but in a completely new way. And you need to look them up because I'm not exactly sure how much if it's public at this point, but they're doing electric planes. I can tell you that much. Curiously enough, the founder of Magpie actually was originally the founder of something called Makani, which was a kite company. They were doing kite-based power. They got sold to Google, but this was 15 years ago. Google shut the project down. He went over to Larry Page's and Sergey's electric plane company. He built something called Heaviside. There's a lot of stories about Heaviside. That got shut down. He's now on Magpie. We were joking a few months ago when I first met him, and he said, yeah, by any standard, he's a failure because none of the projects he's ever worked on has shipped. Instead, he's been a pioneer at every stage, and now he's got freedom again. He's doing something completely different. They already have contracts. So I think that's the key. If we start young, realize it's a very long view. It's something you can work on for a long time. So passion helps a lot. Are you moving to Uganda soon?
I'm going probably this summer again for projects, but moving back to the US to also do a master's there in development, international development. So,
going back to Harvard?
I will try to apply. So I will see whether I can go back. But I totally agree. I think if I had just also seeing that people tackle big things, you're so confined to your high school, and we didn't even have extracurriculars. I think that's not too much of a big thing, or not many in Switzerland. So just having that opportunity because you have a lot of free time. So that would be really fun, or a gap year where you can go to a Moonshot Academy. I don't know do you do that?
That's one of the things we've been doing at Stanford for the last 5 or 6 years, actually, we had traditionally taught our foresight course pretty much nonstop through what's called the academic year. At Stanford, that's 3/4 of 4. And we start in the spring, we do winter, fall, winter, spring, and then we take off. About 5 years ago, we got asked to bring it to the summer, and we were getting hundreds of kids coming in from around the world. And it was that one seminal experience where, they got to come to, California, right? The sun never sets. Everyone walks around without their shoes on. You got to come to Stanford, which, by the way, is a gorgeous campus. You got to spend 8 weeks in this deep dive immersive program doing computer science and doing comms and learning how to work in teams. But then we had a moonshot piece that went next to it. And I mean, I'll tell you the number of kids that have come through there, it's very much like watching you, of just holy shit, that's crazy. You're going to do that. Let me know how I can help, because it's amazing. And we're trying to figure out right now, part of the Building Moonshots book tour is we're working with organizations in different places. We're going to MIT in June. Dr. Carlton is going down to Agade in Mexico next week as part of large programs where we're trying to figure out how to replicate it and scale it. And it's the scaling thing, which is why I'm so jealous of people like Fred Swaniker who say, I'm going to train 1 million people. And you go, okay, that sounds completely cool. I can't imagine doing that at all. But maybe if I aspire to what he's doing, I can do it next.
So what is your, the metric for building Moonshots? I guess building Moonshots, the book, is just, a part in a bigger process, right? That you're aspiring to.
You asked earlier before the call, what was the process like? And I'll tell you, the process was pretty funny. Dr. Carlton has written, and Tamara on the book, she's written a handful of books before. She did a free and open source book that's just based on our strategic foresight tools. You can download it from her website, which is innovation.io. She's a major researcher in how organizational culture works at large organizations and small, and she's got a bunch of free chapters there. We were sitting around, I'd say 2 years ago during COVID. And again, during COVID, things didn't stop for us. People just switched to online. So we were sitting there, and Tamara came and said to me one day, she said, God, people keep asking the same questions about big ideas again. And, we're hearing it from the students in Switzerland. We're hearing it from the students in California. But we're also hearing it from the Swedish government and from French aviation companies who we won't name. And gosh, we need to write this down. And I said, yeah, okay, but what are you writing? And she said, well, it's the little stories we tell. It's the story that says to someone, well, there's not one way to raise finance. There's a handful of ways. Think about all of them, because you might not need to do all of them. And we need to put stories in of people who are really doing it. And all the stories don't need to be about Silicon Valley, and all the stories don't need to be about Elon or Steve Jobs. So you'll find very few of our stories are about the big names. And then Tamara and I just started writing. Just trying to write it down. And part of it was just to get our ideas together. But we brought them to the classes, and we brought them to the schools, and we shared them with our friends. And after a while, Tamara reached out to one of the major publishers, Wiley, and they publish, a wide variety of design thinking and business and lean, traditionally an engineering firm, publisher. And they said, well, gosh, this fits the zeitgeist. We see people asking about this right now. So if you've got a map, if you've got anything that can help, we'd love to take it. And our goal right now is to just support this, get everyone to realize they can do it, and then we'll figure out the next scaling platform. But, give me a few months, right? We're just starting the book launch right now.
So what is the goal, the long-term goal you're aspiring to?
Well,
how many people should build Moonshots?
The goal for everyone. I mean, the goal for the book is go buy the book, buildingmoonshots.com. The goal for the book is to buy the book. But the bigger piece is I've spent 20 years of my life part-time teaching at universities. And at this point, I can tell you that it's not a limitation of the talent. Young people, the supply is endless, notably in Africa, but also places like Malaysia. They have so much energy. They have so many great ideas. They need to be freed. So part of what we've been trying to do is figure out how do you free them more by giving them these mindsets alongside the fact that, hey, if they want to learn math and computer science, do it. If they want to learn policy, do it. There's a role for every single person if you're saying we want to make a better future. And right now, since we're in such a dire need of it, my belief is, okay, if I had to do a moonshot today, my thing is, how do we give this away to every young person in the world to make them feel empowered so that they don't feel frustrated by it because they're not good at math? They can jump to another piece and realize the bigger issue is how to solve big things.
And how do you imagine people using the book? I think it's a compilation of 50 ways or rules or lessons or stories.
Each way is pretty simple. They're broken down into a number of sections. As I was mentioning, there's finance one. There's how to galvanize your team. It's all the things we hear. How do I communicate internally and get my team ready? How do I communicate externally? How do I go find the money? How do I build a pathway? So you start at those. But if you go into each particular way, you'll find it's written pretty simply. A little bit of a background as to what it is and who's using it. So in a lot of cases, the ways we brought forward, that we didn't invent these things. They came from places like Amazon. They came from places like MIT. We put a quick story together. And I think the most important piece is we actually have questions you can ask yourself and ask your team. And they're reflective questions. So I come out of Stanford's design program where reflection is the goal, right? You build something, why? So we can talk about it. So the reflection piece is just those questions alone. And we're going to use them. We used them in the fireside chat with Fred last week. We're going to use them in today's boot camp. Basically, these are questions your team should ask themselves. And once you've started, the teams can't stop. I think where we can go next is, we put this free poster out. How do we put it in people's hands? I think if they have the book, it'll be pretty easy. Flip through it. Read it. It's very lightweight and very easy to work with, which I think was the way we also wanted to consume it. Again, I'm not going to call it TikTok style because we used to have other words for it, but it's very consumable. It's something very fast.
So these are the next steps for your book. Chantal, what are the next steps for your startup?
Getting the financing together, honing our programs and creating new programs, and then going back to Uganda and launching them with our partners.
Wonderful. Well, I think we've already been talking for quite a couple of minutes, and not sure whether you know it, but we always end an episode with the story cubes. So basically I'm giving you 3 dices, and you can roll them. And depending on what you get, just tell me a story, from your life at Apple or what, from anywhere of your life. Just tell me a story about something. Maybe
A real story? Or we can make it up.
A real story.
Oh, okay. I got a real one. Okay, I can't wing it.
Story. Just share something from your life, from what you've been building in Uganda or with building Moonshots. I would be excited to hear that.
Yeah, the reason I was asking, I was just being cruel. Imagination is one of the things that you read enough books about it. We just crushed out of kids in school. So it's amazing. How could you imagine creating a refugee program? Could you have imagined going to Uganda? I mean, and that's the part where you're like, well, in hindsight, it's completely obvious why you took that path, right? But in prospect, like, oh, yeah, okay. And that's the part that I think is really interesting. If you can keep the imagination alive, and there's a million books on this, but the question is, are parents living it with little kids? Yeah. Are schools ready to do things with it? So what do I have? I have the Dead Man. I have the Raven. Usually that's something really good. And a puzzle piece. What pattern do I put these in? I think everything just ends up, I'll tell a great death story, right? The death story was really fun because I lived through the .com and those stories are going away now. It's like listening to old guys talk about, finding gold. But it was interesting. One of my first opportunities to do something amazing was I was 26, 27. I had jumped from manufacturing to software to product to R&D with a German company down to doing government research at the cutting edge with virtual reality when it was first invented. And by the way, it didn't work then either. And what was so interesting is, if you said to me, what's the puzzle you're building? I had no idea. I was stumbling forward into it. And I met a bunch of really amazing people, each of whom said, I can see where this vision goes. And our vision, and I was mentioning earlier, knowing the people that put the iOS and Android together, our vision was back in 1997. Could you imagine holding this really gorgeous high design device in your hand that told you the movie times, the sports scores, the restaurant reviews? We built that. We built it in under 18 months, and it was crazy. Kids wanted to work for us. People wanted to put us in their newspapers and magazines, which at the time was cool. We raised a great amount of money from some amazing people. And then it all washed away. And it was a really interesting lesson for me because I'd been working in that space for, at that point, 4 years. That was a crazy amount of time when you were 27. But at first it had been a passion project. It was just something I worked on in the evenings. What if computing could be mobile? Then it became a research project. I did some work for Daimler-Benz. We tried to imagine and build prototypes to bring it into the app. And I let Daimler pay for it, and they loved the IP, and they chose not to do anything with it. I went and took all my learning and went when I found 2 other co-founders, and they found me. I was just a nerd. They said, hey, let's build something amazing. I said, great. So I went and built a company with them. I mean, it was really them leading the business part, and I was just coming up with how do we do this? And then all of a sudden, literally, it was like overnight. We were one of the harbingers of the beginning of the .com. Our venture capitalists went under early, and it was a really interesting takeaway. Okay, the next day, I was unemployed. The entire product was gone. The vision was gone. But what was curious to me was, well, clearly nothing had gone away. So immediately, some of our engineers went over to work for a small consulting firm. Some of the people we'd hired went to consult for Apple. All of these names will show up in all the books you read about the history of the iPhone and Android, because we all kept working. All those people kept working for it. And that's just interesting to me is when you have a moonshot vision, Elon says tomorrow, 50-50 chance that Starship's going to blow up. Those are pretty good odds for him. Usually it's like 80% chance it's going to blow up. But the 50-50, it's still literally the roll of a die. It's not death, even though something may end in a way that oh my God, my company's gone. That's fine. And I think that's the kind of lesson that you might have picked up more from the American side at Harvard, which is hey, shit blew up. Cool. What are we going to do next? You're like, you expected this? No, we didn't expect it. And we sure as hell don't like it. We don't like failing. But it's not a failure as long as we know why we did it and what we're going to do next. So
that's exactly what I wrote down for what I learned from strategic foresight,
really?
Fail fast and fail often. Yeah, and it's also I think more an American approach because it really is just about learning and having the courage.
It is. I know. It's crazy.
Did I? Okay.
What did you get?
Oh, ladder, circus, and can I choose or do I need to combine all of them?
You can combine. You can tell 3 single stories, or you can just choose one and tell one story, depending on your mood.
I like the latter. I think, maybe tying back to the journey and asking, whether I've done this before. I think I'm really grateful for just following my curiosity. I think first arriving here, even learning about business and what it all entails, and then working for a startup and seeing like the innovation space and be like, oh, that's so interesting. I want to move more into that. And then like slowly building up these interests or social entrepreneurship, like, oh, you can use business for good. I didn't know. So like combining all of these ways, and working for different companies, working in sustainability, and be like, oh, I love when people have like, want to work for impact and have that passion, and still maintaining in the innovation path. And then, all ending up at Harvard and being able to let that flow together. I think I would have never imagined that.
That's the circus, right? That's Harvard's the circus tent. No, but isn't it? Isn't it when you get to when you get to these big universities and you don't have to finish your degree anymore? You're kind of like, I get to discover. You're like, oh my God, I could be on the trapeze. Where's the lions? And then that's the interesting part, isn't it?
Yes, I love that. Just exploring and know, like, I did most of my subjects already, the harder ones, so I could just like fully explore. And I think that's maybe also why it biases me that I say like Harvard, was the thing that led me there. But I think
it could have been anywhere because it was your freedom. but the nice part about universities, even here, is you get to do cool things. That's the nice part of universities. You should be protected. You should explore.
Yeah, and like even here at HSG, I went to Zambia once for volunteering, and there was also like first in touch with like really living in Africa or like in an African country. So yeah, it was funny how it still goes back. Everything ties back. So yeah.
Wonderful. Good. Thank you so much for coming to the studio, talking about moonshots, talking about your very personal moonshots, Chantal. And I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. Thank you for listening and tuning in. And otherwise, I just say thank you and goodbye. Have a great day.